So very often when we speak about the church, it's so strange. When we speak about the church, it's almost like we speak about it as outside of us, as opposed to recognizing that I am part of the church, right? That you are part of the church. And so even in this series, Why Church, there's always a danger of saying, well, something is wrong with the church, therefore the church needs to sort itself out. The church needs to be a place that is safe for people out there to come and experience the love of Jesus. But the danger in that thinking is that the church is not outside of ourselves, because we are part of the church. You are part of the church. I am part of the church. And so we each have a role to play. And so even in this series, as we speak about why church, that it should be a safe space for us and for those who are coming in. We're all responsible for cultivating that space, right? Each and every one of us. And so even just listening to you testify this morning, I was just encouraged by how you recognize that this is not something where I just get to come in and I get to be served, but actually I have a contribution to make. In my own story, in my own uniqueness, in what God has done in my life, I can contribute in some way to making this the kind of place that Jesus requires of us. You see, it's interesting that you mentioned the whole notion of small church and big church. And that's such a relative term, because actually the average size of a church in the world is about 80 people. Right? We get so enamored by a big church, which is only about 2% of the churches in the world. And so the question we should be asking isn't how big or how small a church is. The question we should be asking is, how healthy are we? Right? Are we the kind of space that people can come and experience the love of Jesus? That they can know that there's a God who loves them and who cares for them. You see, underneath the facade of church, we can hide, like you mentioned before. But that's why we're doing this series, because we're trying to cultivate something in and amongst us to recognize that, hey, when people out there are coming from the battles that they have to fight in the world, that they can find a safe space here. That there's a sense of belonging, there's a sense of acceptance, there's a sense of people recognizing who you are as a human being and affording you that dignity and that value and that worth in the same way that Jesus is. Because like we said last week, we live in the age of anxiety. Right? We live in the age of anxiety, and in the age of anxiety, for some reason, we always get anxious. I mean, David is here for the first time with Sabo, and when David messaged me yesterday, guess what were some of the things he said on the message? He said, I was told that it's not safe to travel around Joburg, and therefore could someone please come and give us a lift to church? See, that's the impression that an outsider from Namibia who comes into the country, that's the impression that people are giving him. And so already it tells us that we have our antennas up all the time, right? We somehow feel that it's not safe. And I think a lot of it has to do from our anxiety that we carry from traumas in the past. I mean, last weekend I was doing the wedding of see, now I'm losing my mind. This is crazy. Dave and Claudia, thank you. And you know, we left our kids with my in-laws. But they have a huge swimming pool, and I was saying to Chris, is it safe? You know, I know you're not going to be there because you're going to be with me. What if they jump to the pool? Is my in-law's going to be there? And it's just this notion that somehow we just are not safe, because there's anxiety that just buzzes around us all the time about life, and it comes from our past trauma. And so even before we look at the text, I want to speak a little bit about our past traumas, because often it's our past traumas that makes us fearful. It makes us anxious. And when you think about trauma, you only think about the acute kinds of trauma, right? When you think about trauma, you think someone who has been in a horrific car accident, or someone who's been diagnosed with a life-threatening disease, or someone who has been in an acutely abusive relationship. When we think about trauma, we think about those acute kinds of traumas. But there's also chronic trauma, the kind of trauma that we experience time and time again. Things like when you have a boss at work who's continuously demeaning you, or diminishing you or treating you as someone of not worth. When you experience that time and time and time again, that's a form of trauma. When you experience prejudice from people all the time, that's trauma. When you experience a form of racism from people all the time, year after year, decade after decade, being told that you're not good enough to be with me in my space, therefore you stay away. That's a form of trauma. Right? So we undergo all kinds of trauma. And then you also get secondary trauma, like the first responders, those who are responding to accident scenes, for example. Right? And so we all suffer some kinds of trauma. But here's the thing about trauma is that it changes our brain. It changes the way we think. And so in other words, we're not as optimistic about life anymore. We don't trust people that much anymore. We tend to keep our distance from them, and even though we're with them, we don't share completely what's in our hearts. It colors our life in a way that it leads us down a different path, the one that we never ever chose for ourselves. I mean, it really affects every part of our lives, including our bodies. And so it's important that as people of God, we recognize that part of the reason why we live in a fearful and anxious age is because of our past trauma. And our country has suffered so much trauma. In fact, the brokenness of our country today is because of the trauma not only we've suffered in the past, but the trauma we continue to suffer today. And so it'll be irrelevant of us as churches to just live on spiritual cloud nine and not recognize that we are a traumatized people. We are a traumatized nation. And that's why the church is not a safe space for people. Then what are we doing here? You see, when Jesus walked the earth, he was a safe space for all kinds of broken people to come to. And first of all, to be afforded their dignity and their value and their worth as human beings. And that's part of the reason why I love Jesus, because he's always a safe space for us. And so even as we look at the text today, I want us to put our thinking caps on in terms of what is my contribution to this safe space that we call the church. My story that I have, God's redemption in my life, God's healing in my life, has a place in this church to create the kind of space that this world is desperately looking for. And before we go into our text, just to give a bit of context, Paul writes this letter to the church in Ephesus, right? And he spends 3 chapters just telling them about the wonders and the glory of the church. How amazing the church is, what Christ has done to put this church together. We're going to last forever, that we are co-heirs with Christ. And so he spends 3 chapters kind of building up the church and helping us in a way to get a glimpse of the wonder and the beauty of the church. And then he moves on to the next chapter and he says, okay guys, strap on your boots, because here are the implications. If this is what the church is, here are the implications for us. So turn with me to Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 1. I'm reading from the NLT as I usually do. Ephesians chapter 4 verse 1. So Paul says, it'll be up on the screen as well. It says, therefore, I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. You know, often when the scripture says therefore, we should ask the question, what is the therefore, right? And here we see that he's begging. I mean, my word, he uses such strong language. The Apostle Paul, who's called by God to take the gospel to all the Gentiles, he is begging the church. You know, I don't think we often get to a situation where we're begging people unless we're so desperate. I mean, I had a message on Facebook Messenger recently, and this guy who I hadn't seen in probably 10 years, you know, he messaged me on Facebook Messenger, and he goes, you know, I'm short of money, please, like I beg of you, he used those words, I beg of you, please will you lend me some money. He says, please, I have tears in my eyes as I'm saying this. And I was like, I wasn't sure if he was genuine or not, because I haven't seen him in 10 years, So I phoned his mom and I said, hey, look, he's asking me for money. Is this true or not? Does he need it or whatever? And his mom said to me, look, don't give him money, because he continuously makes bad choices. And he doesn't need your money, so don't give him money. See, this guy was begging for money out of desperation. But Paul is not begging us out of desperation. So what Paul is begging us for, he's begging us because of the gravity of the situation, because the reputation of Christ is at stake here, friends, when we're talking about the church. It's his reputation at stake. And so he's saying to us, therefore I beg of you. I beg of you. He says, you are called. I don't know if we recognize that God has called us into the church. It's not just an invite, it's a calling. Yes, it's an invite, but it involves so much more. I mean, the calling there literally means that you're invited to come and share in a feast. In a feast where you can experience the grace of God, the mercy of God, the love of God, the generosity of God. And so when you come into the church as a Christian, that's what you're experiencing, right? And so Paul is saying you're called into this. But along with that calling, like Brad said in his testimony a few weeks ago, comes what? Comes responsibility with that calling. I mean, it's an amazing call. A few weeks ago, Kathy rocks up at church all sprightly and like so excited, and she says, "Guess what, guys? I'm no longer the business developer of my company. I've now been promoted." But here's how it happened, right? She was called into her office. Into her boss's office, but she didn't know like why she was called in. And so generally you think, oh, I'm in trouble, they're either gonna lower my salary or fire me or whatever. But to her surprise, they told her that they're offering her the national sales manager position. But guess what? That doesn't just mean she earns more money. Well, I hope they're giving you more money. But that means more responsibility, to the point where that very Sunday she came to me and Daryl. She said, hey, like I've got the situation with this employee and I don't know what to do because he's not pulling in weight and they're asking me to talk to him, and so I need wisdom. Would you mind praying for us? She's recognizing the weightiness of that call. Just because she's now the national sales manager doesn't mean now she can take it easy. There's a weightiness and a responsibility to that call. And in the same way, this is what Paul is saying to us, that you have been called into this glorious thing called the church, and therefore there comes the weightiness and the responsibility of creating that space. And I love the language that he uses in this translation. It's to lead a life. To lead a life. It's almost like he's saying to us, you've got to lead yourself. Right? I mean, in a counseling session this week, talking about, we're talking with this person. They were saying, I'm paying more attention to why I think the way I think and why I feel the way I think. I'm watching the rhythms of my life. I'm trying to make sure that I have healthy rhythms and routine. And I said to this person, you're actually leading yourself now. You're beginning to lead yourself. And this is what Paul means. He's saying to lead a life, lead yourself. But the problem is, we can't lead ourselves unless we are being led by Jesus, right? Unless we know how to follow well, we can't lead ourselves. We just can't. I mean, my journey with Jesus has been amazing. He has led me to all kinds of places. He's led me to West Africa, to Ghana, right? I spent time there in Accra. I just enjoyed the culture, the people there, with the outreaches there. The call of Jesus in my life led me to Thailand, where I spent some time there just ministering to little kids and having just this crazy, wonderful, but challenging time. The call of God has led me to plant this church in the midst of all the challenges around me, and sometimes I still doubt whether I should be the one leading this church. But the point is, the call of Jesus has led me to all kinds of adventures. And I've learned to follow, even though I'm scared. even though I feel intimidated, even though I feel overwhelmed, I've learned to actually just put one foot in front of the other and just go where He is leading me. But you know the scariest place where Jesus has led me to? It's not Hillbrow. It's not Thailand. It's not even Bonnie's church. The scariest place that Jesus has led me to is the very depths of my own soul. See, Jesus takes you to places within you that you've never been before. And it's quite a journey because you begin to discover things about yourself that you never knew before. That for me has been the most challenging journey. But as He's led me there, I've learned to follow and I've learned to recognize that He is a safe space. So this is what Jesus is saying. This is what Paul is saying. He's saying, recognize the weightiness of this calling as you have as God's people and learn to lead yourself. But you cannot lead yourself unless you follow Jesus well, unless you follow Him well. And so the onus is on us to create the safe space, not on just some people, it's on us. And then he carries on talking about what this actually means. We carry on in verse 2. This is what he says. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowances for each other's faults because of your love. So in other words, he's saying, love is what build this space, but this is what love looks like. And I really believe that in the day and age that we live in, you see, every human being is looking for a safe space. And when they're looking for a safe space, they're asking these two questions. And these are the two questions they're asking. Am I worthy of love? And is there someone out there capable of loving me? You see, we were well aware of our own insecurities, well aware of our own faults, we're well aware that somehow we are broken. And so in our subconscious mind, we're asking the question, am I worthy of love? Is there someone out there who is even capable enough of loving me? Because if they see me for who I really am, they might stop loving me. You see, we have this internal dialogue inside of us that we're often not even conscious of. And that's why even in our marriages, we're not 100% vulnerable and intimate with one another. Because we're scared that if my wife or my husband really knows what's going on inside of me, maybe their love for me might decrease. Maybe they might love me a little less. So these are the questions that we're continuously wrestling through when we're asking, am I safe in this world? We're asking, am I worthy of love? And is there someone out there capable of loving me? But I love how Paul says, this is what love looks like. The first thing he says is, be humble and be gentle. You know, humility is such a strange thing because like someone said, you know, humility is so shy, as soon as you start talking about it, it decides to run away. You know, and so humility is one of those things, but I think with humility we have to understand what the Bible actually means when it speaks about humility. In this text, it means that you have a modest opinion about yourself. That's what this text means. That you actually have a modest opinion about yourself. So in other words, you're not thinking of yourself better than anyone else, but you're actually saying, well, I'm actually not that great, but I'm here to serve you. I'm here to actually enable you to flourish and thrive. I'm actually here to enable you to prosper. But I wonder how often we have that kind of a posture when we look at others around us. You know, because I don't know about you, but I have that propensity to sometimes delve into self-righteousness. To kind of feel like, well, I'm better than you because I responded better in that way. Well, I'm better than you because I'm not like that. I don't get as angry as you are. You know, that propensity for self-righteousness just creeps in so easily. And that's why it's hard to be humble, right? And then it says, be humble and gentle. I mean, this is someone who has has a spirit that's enduring, a spirit that's not overpowering, a spirit that's not overbearing. But when you're in the presence of someone who's humble and gentle, like you actually feel safe. You actually don't feel threatened. You actually know that they are for you and not against you. But I love how Paul kicks off this section when he says, be humble and gentle. In Matthew chapter 11, that's what Jesus says. He says, come to me, all who are heavy and weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Which sounds good. He says, why? Because why? Because I am humble and gentle. You see, we have not yet learned that Jesus is a safe space. Because our relationship with Jesus often manifests in our relationship with one another. So when we are not 100% safe in the arms of Jesus and we completely intimate with Him, then chances are we will not be with the people who Jesus called His own as well. You know, the two kind of play off one another. So it always starts with how safe you feel with Jesus. Because when you're safe and secure in the arms of Jesus, then you can actually walk out knowing that you can be who you are. You can tell people your deepest faults and your deepest brokenness, because that doesn't change God's love for you, right? It's just so safe and secure in that. And I think that's one reason why there's this trepidation with people around the church. Because, man, if Astrid was to know everything about me, she may not like me anymore. She might see me in a different light. All of a sudden, Matt is someone different. You know? Or if I just tell Sylvester, like, all my thoughts that I think about, then he may just not want to come to this church anymore. And somehow we get this kind of sense that I'm not safe in the church because I can't feel like I can tell people what I'm struggling with, because otherwise I may be judged, I may be condemned, and they may not want anything to do with me anymore. But I hope that as a church we've actually come a long way with that regard. Like I really hope as a church that you're starting to find that this is a safe space. Because I was just so overwhelmed when you said that humility marks this church. I was like, that's the last thing I would have thought about when I think about Pulse, that we are a humble people. But the fact that you would say that is actually so encouraging. Because maybe God is doing something. And maybe if you find this church an uncomfortable space to be in and you can't actually connect with people, then maybe you are proud. Because when proud people mix with humble people, they will feel uncomfortable. Right? They will feel that, hey, these people are not thinking too highly of themselves, but they actually are just walking with Jesus in their brokenness, knowing that in their journey, Jesus is doing something inside of them to try and make them whole, right? And so maybe I just wanted to offer that today, because it wasn't even my notes, but I feel like when Jesus is talking about this kind of humility in the church, and maybe we struggle to fit in with that group of people because of our pride. Because of our pride. So maybe it's time for self-examination. Maybe it's time to look inwardly and go, maybe there's a certain level of pride inside of me that it's almost like I feel like those people are not worthy for me to share my life with them. But Jesus came for everyone, friends. He came for the proud and the humble. He came for both sets of people. So Paul sets off and he says, this is what love should look like in the church. First of all, be humble and gentle. And then he says, be patient with one another, making allowance for each other's faults. And that kind of patience really denotes the fact that you know that you've been on a journey from brokenness to wholeness. You know that you're not transformed overnight. You know that God has had to be patient with you. Right? Over and 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 over again. I did that on purpose because that's like 1% of God's patience with us. But yet somehow we lose patience with people. It's like they're not behaving in a certain way, and therefore patience is one of the hallmarks of a place that is safe. Because people know that I will take 2 steps forward one day, but another day I might take 3 steps back. And another day I may take 5 steps forward, and another day I may take 3 steps back. But I'm on a journey, and I'm on a journey to wholeness. And therefore Paul is saying patience is required in the church. And then he's also saying what he says, make allowances for each other's faults. I love that kind of language, because make allowances doesn't mean that you say, I know what Kathy is like, so I just have to put up with her because she never changes. She's the same as forever. No. It's not that kind of attitude. That's not what he means when he says make allowances. That word literally means in the original language, it means to stand yourself strong under the weight of people's brokenness. In other words, even in the moments you feel like people's brokenness is like weighing down on you, he's saying to plant yourself strong, to root yourself strong, and to stand under that weight. It's almost like you've got to be the support of their brokenness. You've got to make allowances for their faults. That's what Paul is saying. Notice in the safe space there's humility, there's gentleness, there's patience, and there's strength, even under the weight of people's brokenness, because we're all a work in progress, right? So Paul is talking about this kind of safe space that we need to cultivate. And ultimately, this is what I want to say, is that it's love that builds a safe space, right? But love is so airy-fairy. I mean, love is not even an emotion, right? You think about the primary emotions that you have. It's joy, sadness, anger, fear. I'm losing my mind, I forget the last one. But those are the emotions that you have. So love is not necessarily an emotion, but love is an outworking of something that is happening inside of you. And so Paul is saying, you want to know what love looks like in the church? This is what it looks like. Humility, gentleness, patience, making allowance for one another's faults. That is a safe space, friends. In a space like that, you feel that there is room for me to grow. There's room for me to make mistakes. There's room for my faults. But there's room for me to grow because I know that people are patient with me. I know that people are humble because they're here to walk with me. They recognize themselves that they're not the finished product. So even before we close tonight and look at the last couple of verses, I wonder, when you think about these things, what is Jesus inviting you towards in this church that we call Pulse? In this church where you are as much a part of it as anyone else. I want to say it again, even the people who be watching later. You are as much a part of this church as anyone else. Anyone else. You know, when guys are building a house and they're putting bricks together, in between the cement, they're not going, oh, look at this brick. I mean, wow, this brick is outstanding. It's so much better than that brick. This brick is going to make an amazing difference to this house. No. Brick by brick, layer by layer, the house is being built. In the same way, every single one of us contributes to making this a safe space. And then Paul concludes this section, verse 3 to 4. He says, make every effort, right? He's saying strive. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, just as you've been called to one glorious hope. There's nothing more appealing than a community that's united. There's nothing more appealing than that. And unity doesn't mean that we're not disagreeing or that we have differences of opinion. Unity here literally means that When God brings people together who are so different into one space, we're united because there is something much greater than our individual lives at stake here. That God is wanting to do something so big, so glorious, that it's above and beyond our individual stories, but at the same time, our individual stories play a part. Does that make sense? That it's so much bigger than us, but at the same time, it also includes us. That's what oneness is in the church, where the one Spirit is bringing people together into oneness who are different, because the reputation of Christ is at stake, the glory of Christ is at stake. As it shines onto the world, our individual stories play a part. So never ever feel that if you're not here, then it doesn't really matter. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We've all walked a long journey together. And to some degree we've begun to learn about one another. And so when you're not here, it doesn't matter. It means that there are holes in the wall of that building. It means that your unique contribution to this space is missing. And we're not the same without you. We're not the same without you. So I want you guys to recognize that. You spoke about, some mornings you wake up and you're like, I don't really feel like going to the church. But aren't you glad that every time you made a decision to come, that it's made a difference? Yes, amen. Yeah, thank you, Seth, right at the back. One of Paul's Church's biggest fans is Sasha. But we're all in this together, right? Like, our desire is really for this church to be the kind of place where people know, I'm messed up, I'm broken, but I can still come because I know that I'll be loved. I can still come because I know I won't be condemned. I can still come because I know I won't be judged. I can still come because I can experience the compassion and the mercy and the grace of Jesus. That it's a safe space because the people there are humble and they're gentle. The people there are patient with me. The people there make allowances for my faults. The people there are one.